Hey there, friends. Have you seen the latest in the Carl Lentz Hillsong saga? Carl Lentz, of course, was a disgraced pastor from, a couple of years ago who was caught in an extramarital affair. And he was the campus pastor of Hillsong, New York City. This was a big public scandal. And Hillsong Church, of course, one of the world's largest churches, got a huge church with founding pastor Brian Houston in Australia. They, of course, have branches all over the world. Brian Houston himself went through his own legal battles. He was acquitted of what he was accused of. In the middle of all of that, we had a Hillsong documentary come out. And I do want to say, I'm not a Hillsong hater. I also love the church. So this video isn't about tearing down the church. It's really just about talking about what really has been a rather public episode. And recently, Carl Lentz actually went on his own podcast. There's a link in the description to the video. And he was interviewed by his wife. Him and his wife spoke together on this podcast about his extramarital affair and other things, his relationship with Brian and Bobby Houston and Hillsong Church and all of these things. But absolutely incredible. When I saw it come across my recommendations, I thought, wow, let me check this out. And I thought it was noteworthy enough to talk about. So I will get into and play at least the portion of the video where he talks about his affair, the impact on him, his wife, and all of that. I'll save the part of it where he talks about Hillsong for another episode. But in the meantime, before you do that, I want to encourage you to like and subscribe. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. We greatly appreciate it. And of course, I am Pastor AJ. This is Gospel Ministries. You can also learn more about me at pastoraj.com. You can subscribe to my weekly email newsletter. It's just an encouraging way for me to stay connected to you. So again, I would greatly appreciate it if you would do that. And share this video with a friend just to help get the word out. So having said that, this video was fascinating. I'm going to jump right into it. And again, this is it starts off really where his wife is interviewing him about the emotional turmoil and what happened immediately after she found out about the affair.
It was definitely a journey, finding my
huge,
voice.
Impacting. I went before, so 2 days after all of our stuff exploded. I was so that Dino and Bob Goff, a couple men that have never left our corner, just made, somehow I got there. I don't know how I got there. And how I describe on-site, it's where they broke me in a bunch of pieces, then they just send you home.
Yeah.
And so
but you came back so excited.
I did, because on-site was where I...
So what he's talking about here is how he went off to therapy after this all went down. And a couple of, big-name Christian leaders reached out to him. And he mentioned, I kind of bleeped it out there, but he mentions how he was really at rock bottom when this was all going down. I mean, in a dark, dark place.
Found out that there's hope for me.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to get it done, but the choices I've made, they're my responsibility. The decisions I've made, my responsibility. Where some of the origin of the stuff that came from and caused me to become a person that could do that, not my responsibility. And I'll get into that in a second, but that was huge for me, because at that point I was just so filled with my own self-loathing. I had written myself off. Right. And I left on-site going, I don't know what I'm going to do, but there might be hope for me. There might be hope for me yet. So we're in LA, and at that same time, I could feel myself spiraling. And when I talk about a spiral, if you find out you're caught up in compulsive living, you can't control, or you feel like you can't control your compulsions and desires, and it becomes a pattern, cycle. And I basically told you, we were sitting on the beach, and I said to you, I'm not going to make it. I feel like I'm going to do exactly what I've done. And that's pretty much always been my cycle. There'd be a cycle that would include things that I hate, and then all of a sudden you go through the shame, and then the regret, and then the remorse, then the loathing, and do it again. So the cycle sometimes can be months in between some of that stuff happening. And I just said, I'm right on the doorstep. Like, I know, and I feel like I can't control myself. I want to go somewhere to get real help. And you said to me, yes, I agree with you. You know, if you do this again, there is no second chance. There's nothing. We're done. And I might even leave now. But I want you to know, I hope it goes well. And I think it's going to be something that helps you. And I'm believing for the best. And that was a crazy day.
So I don't know if you know anything about the background of all of this. Just kind of crazy, actually, seeing his wife sitting here with him. I mean, you know, it's really hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's been through an extramarital affair. And, you know, how would you respond? I think that was one of the things I found most interesting about this. He's sitting here with his wife now some, 3 or 4 years after the fact. He'll actually mention at one point in the video how he even relapsed again after coming back from treatment. But that was one of the things that blew me away here was his candor about his mindset and some of the things that he was going through psychologically, about his past. He actually talks at one point about how he was molested as a young person. And I hate to say this, I kind of, when I heard him talking early on in the interview, I kind of suspected maybe that something like that had happened to him. And so obviously he went through this really, I guess, dark season. But one of the things that sort of, I don't know what your feelings are when you listen to Carl Lentz, because I was, again, never really a hater. I had heard him speak on several occasions, and he always struck me as a genuine believer. There was the whole episode of him and Justin Bieber, and he was walking around without a shirt off, and I mean, really, really low hanging pants, which isn't becoming of a pastor. But that kind of stuff made headlines. I guess some people noticed those things and felt like there was something up with him. But that was one of the things that I looked at here, and I thought to myself, after all of this went down, it's hard to trust a person. I almost think about like Jimmy Swaggart, and that whole scandal back in the 1980s and all of those things that went down. A preacher that falls from grace, repents, falls from grace again. I wonder if that's what we're going to see here. I certainly hope not. And, you'll see him really go into what seems to be a really heartfelt remorse for what he did, especially when he sees how it impacted his wife and his kids. But just interested to hear what your thoughts are. If you want to leave a comment, I'd like to see how you feel about his overall demeanor. Do you feel like, hey, here's a pastor who's really good at connecting with people? Or do you feel like when he's talking, hey, this is a slick salesman who's just really good at kind of getting people to hear what he wants them to hear? So what's your thoughts on that?
And I went to a rehab in Wickenburg, Arizona, that specialized in all different types of addictions and mental breakdown. And I went there knowing that I had issues, and I found out when I was there that I was dealing with multiple addictions.
Well, you found out first at on-site,
Yeah.
I think, that you had
An anxiety disorder and chronic depression.
Yeah,
And that all happened at on-site.
right.
So I came home from on-site knowing that I'm chronically depressed, unmedicated, have an anxiety disorder, and I didn't think I had any anxiety. Turns
Right.
out that I internalized it so deeply that it just became a part of who I was. And I found out I had some childhood trauma.
I don't know about you, but a lot of times when somebody's caught in an egregious offense and they start talking about how they're struggling or they deal with struggles or they have some kind of sickness, my natural tendency is to feel like, oh wow, that's a convenient excuse. But he does go into, like I said, his past, some things that he dealt with in childhood, my sincere hope for Carl Lentz is that he can recover, that he has recovered, that we're getting a truthful portrayal of him and his motives and, his desire to change and not see himself relapse into something like this again. But obviously that's, I think, my hope and probably the hope of others for him.
That produced some things in me that I did not see coming. And then so when I got to this rehab, it was, the drive from the airport to the thing is about an hour and a half into the dead of night desert. And you get there and you have to give your phone away and they search you and you go through a big medical examination and they basically shut the door behind you. And I remember that day going, this is it for me. Like,
Well,
I can't believe I'm...
And I couldn't talk to you for 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
The first 2 weeks. So, and this was over Christmas time.
Yeah, and our
So my
kids are
first
still
Christmas-
wondering what's going on. And then I leave to go to a rehab. You're by yourself
I was by myself at Christmas with the 3 kids.
with the kids.
on the other side of the country that we just moved to.
And right before that was Thanksgiving, where we were headed to a friend's house that called 5 minutes before we left and said, hey, we don't want you to come anymore. So our kids were like, well, why aren't we going to Thanksgiving at this person's house? And I'm like, you know what? Our plans have changed. And everybody was kind of reeling from that. And that's still painful because that's more kid stuff that isn't deserved. Like, I get it.
Ava's talked about that. She said that during that time, she didn't know if you were coming back.
This is one of the most amazing things to me is watching his wife sit here and talk to him. I mean, thinking about them even still being together, what would your reaction be if you found yourself, in particular your spouse, in the midst of a scandal like this? And what would you do? Would you kick them out of the house? Would you try to reconcile? I honestly, I'm not 100% sure how I would handle something like that. But obviously, there's nothing wrong with an initial, probably expected initial outburst of anger. But I think seeing that she stayed with him through all of this. I mean, and if I understand him correctly too, he mentions how he relapsed again. Holy cow!
Right.
Because she was how old? 15? 16?
Yeah.
And so the anxiety, she started to have some anxiety issues. Stomach issues started from that, which we didn't realize until a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
When she started talking about it, she's like, I think that's when I started to get anxious I didn't know if Dad was coming back from when he went away in LA because everything was so up and like just crazy.
Fast
they just
crazy.
Because Charlie had come back from her hospital
We
stay.
don't live in New York anymore.
Well, after she was done with the hospital, we left from New York the next day and moved to LA. So everyone was just
reeling. It
was awful.
So I'm in that rehab, and that place to me is it's the word they use a mental picture called hugging the cactus. That's what real recovery looks like.
Yeah.
And you can leave anytime you want. And I definitely tried to leave twice, maybe 3 times even.
Well, I said I told someone to tell you.
If you leave early,
don't come back here.
Yeah. Yeah. And
there you go.
No talking for 2 weeks, and then you start getting letters. And, I read some of them a couple months ago. We were looking through it. And I don't like even looking back on the letters. So you sit there, and I think the feeling of being an utter failure overwhelms you when you're at a rehab.
I would imagine.
And you're just there like, what has my life become? And I remember reading Ava's beautiful handwriting when she basically said, Dad, I love you. Yeah, she said, Dad, I love you. And rehab's going to be great because they're going to help you fix some of the broken pieces.
Now, this is obviously the portion of the video where he really seems to be showing some deep emotional connection. And I was honestly, when the video started and I saw him talking, I thought, slick preacher. Then we got to this part. He started crying, and he continued crying. The way that he talked about his kids, regardless of how you feel about him, tell me this doesn't move you to tears, thinking about how something like this affects the children who are right in the middle of it. Those of you who have been through a divorce, and unfortunately, God forbid, if you ever go through one, you see these kind of things affect your kids firsthand, and it's just gut wrenching. I mean, I hate even in a situation like this where you have somebody who had this secret life that was going on for a long, long time, and then a woman who stays with him. Incredible on its own. Even in a situation like that, I think you have to connect with some of these people on an emotional level and think about just how it affects the lives that are involved and connected. And even at one point there mentions about the daughter that she was actually dealing with anxiety problems because of this for some time before they found out about it.
How does that feel as a dad?
Oh, man. Oh, it's bad. It's bad. Because I'm like, I don't need my baby girl encouraging me. This is not the design. And it definitely set me up, though, to stick it out. And yeah, I found out early on, I found out that I had developed a drug addiction, and that was hard to hear because it was a part of my life for so long, and it was prescribed, and I obviously started to abuse it. And so I was a full-fledged drug addict on top of everything else, and with some of my compulsion issues that, led to things that you never think of me doing when it comes to infidelity and just lying. I found out that I was molested, as a young boy. And when that happens, your brain chemistry is altered. And once they broke it down for me, I realized, yeah, this is a significant part of who I am that I have left unaddressed, unattended.
And that you downplayed.
That I downplayed my whole life. And I was so mad most of the time at rehab. I was so mad because I'm like, this is such a clear reason. Why couldn't God save me a different way? And that I spent every other day mad because I'm like, this isn't fair. I've got, and they teach you, and it's good for me to re-highlight on our own podcast. When you give reasons for why you failed, it is not an excuse.
Right.
If we don't give people reasons, nobody can grow from our story. There is no excuse for what I did.
Right.
None. And there's still reasons. So the reasons are what they are. They don't change my consequence. They don't change the fact that it's my responsibility. But when I found out that sexual abuse to a child in that way can alter you and begin a life pattern of secrecy and hiding and secrecy and hiding, and you don't even know why.
Protecting yourself.
I don't know why I'm lying. I don't know why I'm lying. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know. And slowly but surely, I remember going in there feeling like a block of ice, and I felt like every day I would melt a little bit.
Well, the first
interesting hearing him here talk about his childhood and past with abuse, because I think here really this is where I would imagine it could rub some people the wrong way, because he seems to be maybe justifying his behavior a little bit, or maybe at the very least explaining it. I don't know that he's necessarily excusing it, but he does multiple times say in this interview, I was the one who did it. He does take responsibility for it. So, I mean, I think if it weren't for that, you would be tempted probably in this moment really to question, what is he doing here? Is this actually a legitimate apology or what's going on here? But, one thing I really wish for him when I look at him in what he's wearing there and all of that, like, I understand the desire to connect with people as a pastor. I'm not one who wears a suit to preach on Sunday morning, but I'm not saying a person has to, like, dress ugly either, but with the nature of what he struggles with, I just can't help but wonder, like, why not dial it back a notch, like the fashionability and that kind of a thing. I can't help but wonder, like, is that your propensity to really try to look good all the time and speak good and be slick and personable with your words? I can't help but wonder, would that, maybe propel him into other compromising positions where he struggled?
This letter I got from you that I burst into tears was when you said, I've realized I've got a drug addiction.
Yeah.
And I feel so different. And I bawled my eyes out because one of my things that I'd been praying for years was the fact that I knew, I could see it, that it was like what was prescribed to you, but it was not good. Like, it was not doing you good. And anytime I'd try to bring it up, it was like, it's like when you talk to an addict, they're going to give you the pushback.
Yeah.
So it just was always an awful conversation. So when you did that, when you sent me that letter, I bawled my eyes out and I felt such a relief. And so then it just gave me hope for whatever else was coming for the next 6 weeks of you being there.
Man, that would be hard. Even under the circumstances, I would imagine. I would probably be pretty angry. And, let's say you throw your spouse out of the house, but that would still be hard. It's hard there's kids in the picture. It's hard to blame somebody. You almost want to look at a woman like this and be like, why on earth are you still with this guy? What's wrong with you? Almost. But, these kind of situations are obviously incredibly difficult. Like I said, if you've been through something like this before, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So
yeah, that was amazing.
What you learn in rehab is tools to stop manipulating everything around you. And I had learned ways to manipulate situations and people.
You think?
So I could function how I needed to function. And when you go to a place like that, there's just nowhere to go. There's nowhere to hide. And there were some really tough, hard moments. But sticking that out is one of my proudest victories as a man.
Can you talk about, sorry, keep going.
No, go ahead.
Can you
imagine the amount of manipulation here. My understanding, too, if I remember correctly, back to when this was all going down and some of the stuff that they were saying in the news about it, like the church knew about it. I don't know that they covered it up, but I guess they covered it up. I don't know. Maybe somebody can correct me in the comments, but they knew about it. This was something that happened multiple times before he was eventually caught with the woman that he was caught with. Obviously has a propensity for this kind of thing. It's, boy, what is that like? Being in the mind of somebody who has this level of a secret life. I've always wondered that because I've thought to myself, like, I have a hard time not being honest. And sometimes I'm painfully honest. I don't know if there's anybody else out there like me, but I've just wondered, what would it be like to live in this kind of secrecy and the control and the manipulation. I would suspect there was a lot of gaslighting. I would suspect there was a lot of, this is a you problem. Probably saying those kinds of things to his wife. Maybe you've had this done to you. Maybe you've done it. Statistics show that there's somebody listening to this right now that's watching this. You've been the abuser. You've been the adulterer. You've been the one in the secret life. And, what all went into that? And how did you walk around in secrecy the way that you did?
Talk about one of the most significant moments that helped you in rehab.
Which one?
I was thinking about you talking to your little self.
Oh, man.
Because I think people think rehab is just maybe sitting in a room and like recover, like trying to recover from whatever addiction you have. What was the work like? Like, I just remember you talking about this one part that was very.
Let me get there. I'm just going to take a breath. I think, and my tears still work. I understand.
They're real. Someone
was asking.
He just seems so polished. I hate to say that, and I'm even willing to extend the benefit of the doubt to him and say this is legitimate. But boy, he just seems so polished when he's talking. It's just really hard to get there.
Your dad always used to cry when he preached, and were those tears real? And I'm proud to say they're real. I understand the question. I understand the criticism even, but crying was a healthy part of my life before. One of the few.
One of the
and it has carried over. Might even be worse. So my tears are my tears. They come out. They come out. I wish I could do it on command. I'm not that good. Not that special. So you go through it. You go through a thing where they help you dig into the age you were when that abuse happened, and it's hard. It's you just don't want to go there. And when you first get to rehab, there's a bunch of grown men walking around with stuffed animals, and you're like, man, what are these guys doing with stuffed animals? They're like, oh, have you been to week 3 yet? I'm like, no. Like, you'll see. It's like Fight Club. And then we go through our own, and I remember as I'm sitting there with the therapist, and you do it with 3 other guys that are in your learning pod.
Is anybody else out there wondering, like, is this true? I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I mean, because of the public nature of this whole thing, is there anybody else that's wondering that? I'm not going to lie and say I didn't have the thought. I did. I wondered, was he really molested? I mean, obviously a terrible thing, by the way. I mean, many people deal with that. And, I've had grown men talk to me about their situation from childhood, just like he talks about here. There's always hope, no matter what you're going through.
After we start talking for a little bit, I remember grabbing my otter, like a stuffed otter, and I remember like leaving that thing after a lot of stuff went down in that session and walking around with my stuffed animal. And I would see new guys. They'd be like, "What's with the stuffed animal?" I'd be like, "You'll see." But they force you to go back to that age where you were damaged and begin to speak life into it and begin to understand yourself and begin to understand what happens to a brain at that age. And I had a beautiful family, a beautiful upbringing. I love my mom and dad. They're amazing. It just was one horrible situation with a house guest. As a parent, it's your worst nightmare because we've all been there. You trust people, and I was violated. I was abused. And caused a lot of wreckage. And I'm going to use it. And I don't know if I'll ever not be emotional.
I don't think you will.
I don't think I will. It's hard to think about what it was like to be lost before knowing some of these answers. And so you get to this place where you start talking to this kid. They make you write a letter with your left hand, which looks eerily like the age everybody was.
Interesting.
And it just began a journey for me of being kind to myself and being patient with myself.
Because what you didn't realize was you hated yourself. I mean, worse than that, you loathed.
Yeah. There are parts of.
This is one of the things that they say about abusers is that they'll put pressure on people, young people, and it's often too. It's other young people. In fact, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe most of the time molestation occurs. It isn't. It's another young person. It's a 17-year-old. It's a 12-year-old when the kid's 5 or something like that, who themselves have been molested. And so, but the reason that a lot of people don't come out sooner, sometimes there's threats, sometimes there's I'll tell your parents, you'll get in trouble or something like that. But it's really a personal shame. And people blame themselves, unfortunately, for these kinds of things.
Me, you know, with loathing that I didn't understand, because I dealt with the up and down of a compulsive issue, addiction, my whole life. And you just start to hate yourself. You start to hate that part of you. And then you learn you got to bring that part out, and you have to talk to it, speak to it, look at it, give it help. Repressing it doesn't work.
Right.
Hate.
You know, how many of us out there, you know, maybe not with abuse, maybe you have dealt with that specific issue, but I think everybody can relate with that idea of hating yourself. That's something that really, how many times do we do things? How much of what we do is because of something that happened in our childhood? It's because of, you know, something somebody said to us. Gosh, and when we can break free from that and realize that God loves us and He's got a plan for us, we're on the right course.
It doesn't work. Using bad Christian doctrine about praying more does not work.
Right.
And that's where I found out I will not be a victim to the situation. Mm-hmm. And they start to give you language for that. And now I don't look at my abuse as something that destroyed my life. I look at it as something that has helped me be a catalyst for healing in my own life and hopefully for other people. So
that's a good place to just pause for a second and ask, is there something that you're dealing with? Is there something that you're holding on to that you need to maybe reach out to help for? You know, regardless of the validity of this whole thing, because of the circus that has surrounded it, is there something you're dealing with right now? I'm sure that there's somebody in your life you can talk to, you can reach out to for help. You know, being a pastor, I always want to tell people, go to church. If you're not a church person, church is a great place to go just to get started. A lot of times you need to talk to a counselor. You need to take some more steps. But, you know, for me as a young person, church was freedom. Church was a great place where I could go to get to know God and find the healing I needed. I think the same is true for you, friend.
I sit here today with years of sobriety as a recovering addict, and I'm proud of that. It's awesome. But more than that, I sit here with a whole lot of compassion. And because I know so many people have been through similar things, and they haven't had the opportunity to go where I went.
Right.
And yes, my failures were in public, and that is bad. It's very hard, but I don't know if it's worse to fail in private where nobody knows and you just have to deal with it.
Deal with it yourself.
I would say it's nobody wants the kind of situation he was involved in. You know, it's if God can spare you from that, then you know that's. I always find too, there's warnings. You know, there's like red flags all along the way where I don't know if you were ever a kid, and you know, my whole story is I read the Bible for the first time in a jail cell when I was 16. Me and my friends were playing a prank on our principal. We ended up in jail, and that was the first time I read the Bible. I made God a promise I'd read the Bible when I got out, and that's what started me on the path of coming to know Christ, and you know, changed me. But I remember before I got arrested and spent that night in jail, I remember, you know, there were several points along the way where I could have stopped, you know. So if that's you, I'm going to answer this question that he just threw out there. I don't know if it's better. It is better. It's better to stop short of a huge catastrophe that defines you publicly in the eyes of other people. The Lord wants to save you from that. And things like this should be a big warning to anyone that is walking in some kind of a secret sin. You will be found out. It's just a matter of time. So, you know, if you want to spare yourself what he dealt with, take the steps that he took after the catastrophe happened, you know, except before the stuff hits the fan.
I look at it now, even that is a blessing, because if you watched my life blow up in public, please keep watching. Yeah. You know, you owe it to yourself to see where the story goes. So I'm an example of somebody that made huge mistakes, and rather than just try to not get caught again, I wanted to change.
Man, I hope he doesn't. I look at these people and I think to myself, like, let's say this is legit. This guy obviously struggles with an addiction, and it ain't just a prescription pills. Like he struggles massively with sexual addiction. There's cycles that are involved in his life that my guess is he's going to struggle with it for the rest of his life. My father was an alcoholic who stopped drinking before I was born. Made a huge impact on my life. And I know that my dad couldn't take a drink of alcohol, like ever. He had 37 years of sobriety before he died, 37. And I know that, after, in his 37th year, it wasn't like, okay, I'm healed now. I can go drink alcohol. I'm good. It wasn't like that. And so, I would think that he's putting on a good show here, and I'm hoping that this is legit change. But I sure hope, not just for him, but for his wife, who has stuck with him through all of this stuff. How many women would have done that? And for the sake of his kids, I really, for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of Jesus, and for the sake of Carl Lentz, he's a human being. My prayer is that he really is recovered from this, and that it's going to last.
There's a part of you that's like, how quickly can I repair this so I can, move on? And you see it all the time in ministry. Like, dudes will go through stuff, and then a month later they're doing it again, whether it's starting a new church. Mm-hmm. And I cannot judge those people. All I know for me is it took me decades to get where I was. And it wasn't going to fix itself in a couple of months. You really, really got to excavate. You got to break it all down.
Still not fixed.
You have to completely
keep working
life, God, to break it down for something better to be built. And that's my story for sure. I lost a lot in that fire.
Do you think maybe this is one of the problems with an addict? And everybody's a sin addict, right? So we can all relate with this. Not judging based on the kind of sin, but do you think maybe the problem is the addict thinks often very quickly, I'm over this? See, I think that's one of the signs that we're right on the verge of a fall, maybe an epic fail of some kind. So I think about the Bible verse: "Watch yourself, lest you are tempted." We've got to be very, very careful.
A lot. But what came out of it was a different human being. And I'm here today, very, very, very involved in our recovery community. I did have a relapse. And that was a couple of months after I got back from rehab. And pride is a thing that dies.
What was that like, by the way? What was that like? He mentions it very casually here to his wife and to everybody listening. This is one of those moments I'm really flabbergasted that she's still with him. Wow. Your spouse comes back from rehab and they fall right back into it again. Holy cow! What do you do?
But I remember talking to the nurses before I left. They give you an outpatient plan, and they're like, a lot of guys struggle. And there is, relapse potential. And I'm like, I'm not going to relapse.
Which I think every single
I'm going to be the only guy who never relapses.
Right.
And they teach you how to live a life where you draw circles. There's an outer circle, which is super healthy behavior. There's a middle circle, which is danger ground. It's stuff you can't avoid as an addict, as a recovering addict, but it's stuff that you really need to be mindful of. Mm-hmm. And then there's the inner circle, which is a complete relapse. Got to go back. Yeah. And when I had my relapse, only a couple months, maybe 3-4 months after getting back, I remember looking at you and explaining the situation as if it was already over. Like, hey, I this is what happened, and I'm sorry. I understand. If you go, I understand. I've got no more chances here. I don't see this like that. I didn't know that this particular thing was going to trip me up like that. And I know that I can fix it. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it, if you'll allow me. And you were really gracious with me. I don't know where you dug to find that kind of grace, but it's a real part of our story. And
what was she thinking in that moment? And if you have been in that situation before, you're a woman, Your husband's had multiple affairs maybe on you, and you stayed. What is the mindset? You wonder. I'm wondering what's in her mind even as he's talking. But is this really the only slip up? You would never really know. And I think that's the hard thing about a person who's been dishonest with you, is when you find out what they did, you never really know. I remember somebody I knew, a father figure to me, told me one time, says, you only ever know what a person shows you. And there's a lot of truth to that. I think that it's something really we need to take into all of our relationships, so we're just more realistic about what they are and who people are. But, that's, my goodness gracious. Wow.
And it's important that people know that, because I know a lot of people try to get sober and they fail. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible feeling. And I'm not sitting up here, as a guy who I've been there. I'm there today. I've got to stay sober today. I've got to stay recovered today. And I've got to do it again tomorrow. But I like being able to look at guys and say, man, I'm sure you've been humiliated. I have been too. I'm sure your situation was bad. Mine was real bad.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you feel discouraged because you might have relapsed. I've been there. But there's hope. Right. And so that's what the rehab part of this story for me was powerful. I don't know. I've already been able to help a couple other people get there, and that's a joy. It's beautiful. And between the two of us doing the work that we've done, we're sitting here, very different people.
Yep.
But really grateful for it.
I would think this is what I wanted to ask. Does the person who is staying in this situation, the wife or hypothetically the husband, do they just sort of mentally and emotionally not forgive and naively go, okay, this person really has changed, but what made you stay? Did you just accept that you might always wonder and maybe even in the back of your mind think this person is going to cheat on me again, but I'm going to stay with them anyways? Not necessarily something, I could never tell anybody what to do. I don't know that that's really the best way to go about it, or pastorally advice I would give to somebody in that situation. I think a lot of times what you find in the person who's been cheated on is a fear of moving on themselves. They don't know who they are without their marriage. They don't know who they are without their spouse who cheats on them all the time. There's a little bit of this in all of us, and even outside of the marital relationship, there's a lot of us, we get attached to things and people, but I think God's always trying to grow us. I know there's a healthy way to do that, and I'm glad that they're still together, but I kind of hope that in the back of her mind, she's not just like, well, here's this guy and he's always going to cheat on me and I'm okay with that. I don't think Jesus would tell us to constantly put ourselves in a position. He did mention, Jesus mentioned specifically that that was the exception, was marital unfaithfulness for divorce. So that's obviously a very serious thing. The motivation there. So hopefully she can move on from that. And I forget what else I was going to say.
You are a very different person. And I think that's been hard for me. It's been sad because the people that have left our life, I feel like, if they, you were a great friend, a great person before this, but you're an even better person now. Like, you're such a different person. And I think I saw someone put up the other day on Instagram something along the lines of that, like, people remember where you were, but it's a shame that they don't stick around to see what you become.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think that we've got a lot of friends that have stuck around and it's been amazing, but I just want to say publicly, I'm proud of who you are.
Thank you, love.
And the man that you've become and the work that you put in every day to be that person. I know it's not easy. I know any addiction isn't easy to overcome, but you do it really well day by day, and you're very conscious of it, and I see it and I acknowledge it.
It was also
So she, I mean, answers my question, I guess, clearly has some kind of a belief that he is changed, or I guess at least changing. And, a good support, I guess, a good spouse, but, not necessarily, like I said, as a pastor, it's really hard to tell people what to do in these kinds of situations, because she did have a biblical warrant to step out of this marriage. Although I don't think should always be our first response, depending on the situation. You see in the Bible, God tells the prophet Hosea to go and take an adulterous wife, which he does, and she cheats on him, and he tells him to take her back, and this happens multiple times. It's an illustration for God's relationship with Israel, and by default, us, because we're grafted in as Christians. I don't know if you knew that or not. Grafted into Israel. You are a part of God's chosen people. And so it's a metaphor of God's relationship with us. He doesn't leave us. We shouldn't always be quick to look at offense and give it what it deserves. I'm thinking of the woman caught in adultery, where Jesus tells, them, let he among you who is without sin cast the first stone. You all know the story. But, I guess that's what she did. Like I said, I mean, I don't, it's hard to know what's in a person's heart. I hope she doesn't have that kind of a mentality where she just is unable, incapable of stepping out of a situation. A lot of times, by staying in a situation like that, you become what a lot of people call an enabler. You actually help that person to perpetuate their cycle. Whereas if you're willing to step out of, with the threat of removing yourself from the relationship, it's actually the best thing for the person who's caught in the sin cycle.
Thank you. I was heavily addicted to my own opinion.
Right.
Which is a very sinister, but just as deadly, addiction. And yeah, I'm grateful for where we sit. Some people that left, we'll talk about friendships in depth, but I think it's hard when you go through a valley and people leave and you get out of the valley and they might come back and you're so different that it's like, God,
we got nothing to.
We're not the same people. So it's like you had to leave for your reasons, but when you're not with somebody in the fire, you can't understand what the fire smells like, what it feels like, because you chose to leave. The reasons don't need to get judged. You just weren't there.
Yeah.
And so
Which there's a better way to come out of a negative situation. You don't want to look at things like this. This is what I always want to tell young people who are raised in the church. You don't want to listen to the drug addict's testimony and then psychologically think that you're supposed to go through this incredibly, horrible situation to find Jesus. Jesus meets us in those horrible situations. He met me in a jail cell, but I wouldn't recommend that. I think the better thing is, especially from a church perspective, we want to make sure when people are going through stuff like this and they come out of it and they find Christ in it, we want to make sure when we give those people a pedestal, we want to make sure that we're not glorifying by any stretch what they did. I think this goes on far too often in a church context. And, a lot of times I think kids pick this up in Christian schools, just in Christian circles and churches. This idea that I'm supposed to have this, this drug addict story. I'm supposed to have this I hit rock bottom story. There's a lot of people in life that don't hit rock bottom. You definitely need to realize at some point your inadequacy without Christ, but I don't think you have to find yourself losing your wife and kids in order to do that. Just something to keep in mind. Like when you hear a person talking about how, I'm glad about what I went through. Oftentimes I'm thinking like, I hope people watching this aren't glad they went through what they went through. That's really the whole point, is so you tell another person so that they don't go through it. God does afford us other ways to deal with sin in our lives. That's being transparent is one of those ways. Being transparent. If you live a lifestyle of transparency, you walk in the light, then God will deal with it will help you deal with some of the stuff so that you don't find yourself in this kind of a situation.
That part of someone's life, and that's not on them. That's on me. That's on the person that made the mistake. Because you don't have to go through valleys with people. You don't. And so that is something we found though, is that when we do catch up with some people, in our heart we're like, don't feel sorry for us.
Yeah, we're good.
I know you say you're praying for me, but I'm kind of praying for you as
You're
well.
still in it.
So that's been new to be like, I know like you might leave and feel sorry for me. Don't.
We're like,
don't.
The feeling of freedom that you have when you are honest and living with no secrets. What is it? No secrets, no lies.
No secrets, no lies. No untalked about triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's super freeing and very powerful. So it's sometimes when I see people, I'm like, oh, you still have to live like that.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Been there.
Yeah.
Been there.
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. And, feel free to share your thoughts on this. I just felt like it was noteworthy. It being in the evangelical church community, this was something that really, I guess, rocked a lot of people. I know that there were those who weren't shocked by it, but it's still one of those public scandals that takes place that I think not just for myself, but for all Christians, when you see stuff like this, you have to really wonder how to compartmentalize the feelings that you have. How do I view this? How do I learn from it? One of the best things you can do as a Christian is learn from the things that other people go through. You're going to have to go through your own things, but I think it's the exceptional person who can look at somebody else and go, I saw what happened to them when they did this, and so I'm not going to do that. If you're parents, teach your kids that kind of stuff. Teach them to learn from other people, learn from you. Be honest with your kids. I think that's another thing you can do is be honest with your kids to whatever degree you feel like you need to be about your mistakes, about the fact that you're a flawed person. Let them see that in you so that they realize they don't have to be perfect people too. So how does this make you feel? How might you feel like seeing something like this is life-changing? And it goes without saying, what are your thoughts on all of it? And do you feel like this is legitimate? Do you feel like it's just crocodile tears? Do you feel any need at all to extend any form of sympathy to this infamous individual? I would say at the very least, and I know he said at the end there, this is exactly what I was talking about, saying, I'm not sorry that I went through it, or don't feel bad for me, that kind of thing. I would say at the very least, this significantly damaged his credibility and the audience that he had. People who would be willing to listen to him, because, apart from his wife, he's got a whole lot of people out there who know of him, who listen to his ministry, who listen to him preach sermons. And all of those people now never know whether they're getting the genuine person. That's something that will honestly haunt him for the rest of his life. Although that's certainly not our prayer, not something we would wish on anybody. And why don't we close up with a word of prayer? I want to pray for him, and I want to say a word of prayer for you too. If you're struggling with something, that was one of the reasons I wanted to cover this story, because I felt like there's lessons to be learned here. So let's say a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you right now. We want to lift up our brother Carl to you and his wife and their family, God. We actually want to pray for the protection of Jesus over them. They are real people, and they have real problems just like the rest of us. And God, we actually want to ask for your mercy over Carl Lentz, and especially over his family. We want to pray your grace. We want to pray authenticity, that he actually is recovered from this stuff, Lord. So we lift him up to you, God. We also want to pray for those who are out there right now who might be struggling, God, that you would open eyes, that you would open hearts, and give people a willingness to do something about the secrets that they have that are eating them alive on the inside, that will eventually come out in a negative way, God. We pray that you put somebody in their path that they can speak to. We pray for healing. We pray that you would open the eyes of their hearts, that they see you want to help, and give them the courage to do what they need to do. Maybe somebody's sitting out there right now, Lord, who's been dealing with a secret for a number of years, God. We just want to pray for the strength to do the right thing, Lord. Because when we do the right thing, yes, it blesses other people, but it also blesses us too. And so we pray for that blessing for those who are in our listening audience today, God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, friends, God bless you. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were blessed by this. Like I said, if so, give me a thumbs up. I'd greatly appreciate it. It just takes a second to do. And you can also share this video with a friend. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. You can also go to pastoraj.com and you can connect with me in lots of ways. I'm also on every other social media platform there is at Pastor AJ Platt. I love you, friends. God bless you. Keep preaching the gospel. Keep believing in the name of Jesus. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.